Hey, well, I took a long nap. I'm just like, well, I just thought about something about AM and PM. Well, then, of course, there's AM, PM, military time, and a couple other times. But I was thinking about the time when AM and PM meet, and they kind of go like this. Well, and it's either dusk or dawn, and how the night and the morning kind of go like that. And of course, I've been both an AM and a PM person. Most of my working life was at night. And there's something about sleeping during the day. Well, if you're a night worker, and you know what I mean, if you work the night shift, you know what sleep is like. It's different kind of sleep, but it's heavy sleep or light sleep. I know that sounds confusing, but if you've been up all night, you know what I mean. And in the winter, it doesn't seem like you get any day. I know some places that are like that. I was sitting outside, and it's funny because I saw a little field mouse. Well, and you really can't call it a field mouse, can you? But that's what you're accustomed to calling them, is field mice, because you grew up on a farm, or not really, but in the country, and that's what you were taught as a child, that those are field mice, or FM. But really, when you think about it, they're really city mice. Well, and then they're just mice. But that same question goes about birds and about squirrels. What happens when you relocate a city mouse to the country? Do they go, what is this, corn? Or do they just know that it's corn? So are they instincts? Or are they like part of the environment? Or do they watch the other mice then? This mouse was daring today because there was a dog out there. I don't know, I just thought about that. I'm going to take my other camera and go down by where that mattress is set up, and the windbreak, and the hole in the fence. When you can... Bailey, it's just... Well, and you can think of the hole in the fence, there's many different things. Now, there were holes in fences that people escaped from, and then escaped into. In many ways, there was lots of those kind of places, like the fence that they were putting up in the United States around the border. Or the fences around Palestine. Or around Germany. Or around reservations at one time. Or cattle fences. I think about this, and don't laugh. And I'm not against eating animals or meat I mean, I think there's a, well, when you're in somebody's house and that's what they have, or in their home or their world, really, then you accept what they offer. But I think about the word free range chickens, and I'm like, free range chickens. Well, isn't that funny? They're free range until they're ready to slaughter. So you see what that means. Well, Stephen, you do. I mean, you've witnessed animals and people. Remember, you said, Stephen, that people are basically animals on the on a different level. But are they on a different level? In many ways, animals are very clever because they're cute and cuddly. And I want a puppy, I mean, much like people. Who wants to? I mean, who hasn't seen a little furry otter swimming in the water and then thought, oh, I want an otter? And then been like, otters are vicious, you know? And bears, I mean, who? Well, and you see what happens when you put wild animals in, like big wild animals. You saw that with those guys in Las Vegas. Well, they got attacked. Domestication of wild animals. Somewhat like secrets do enforced compliance on religious matters. I know you're thinking, how did you go there, or why? Well, many reasons. A lot of time those lies are, well, they bring you shelter. There's two types of shelter. There's heaven all around, spirit shelter, and then there's man-made, and I use man as in being made. And many times, spirit shelter is what people need, but they get this being made shelter. I know, right? You're like, well, why do you say it like being made shelter? And I don't mean, like, homes are a good example, or apartments, but I mean a physical body. It's interesting. They're saying they created their own happiness in this song to shelter them from the truth. Because a lot of times, truths are the hardest thing to hear. And people may think I'm crazy, or not. I'm interested to know if anybody thought about themselves as a Dorian Gray. I told you that I could destroy everything that I have and still be Stephen Philip Lindquist, but why fall into that? But I thought about it. Or I actually was thinking about it. interesting to think about. You know how when you take a cat to a new home and they look around like, and they kind of crouch down and they're like, they don't know where they're at. And you know what they're looking for? High points and places to hide until they get acclimated. Other animals do that too. Lots of times, dogs will shiver in a new area or around some dogs. And have you ever brought an animal to the vet? They know they're going. It's not just because, well, you've been talking to them about it probably. Oh, you're going to the vet. And then they're like, oh, no, I'm not. Yeah. Who signs up for that? It's like going to the doctors. They're like, I know that word, vet. And that's like a, you know. I remember I said that Bailey was upset because I had been talking about making him homemade food, and then Sean said no, and then I got home, and they were like, where's the food? You know, it's like, it's just interesting. Anybody with pets or companions or... And some places were really smart. They knew that companion animals would change the environment of, let's say, a healthcare institution or a wellness place. What's a shared energy? You walk into your house or your apartment and you see a small cat or a large cat, a fast cat, or a dog, and you're either like, oh, I just got home from a long day at work, or or you smile, you know. I know, right? I think he's saying, well, tell him that it's a police state, Stephen. You know? Well, in some ways, that's what happened after 9/11. And you knew it was going to happen. I mean, you told Fiacra, oh, you said this is what's going to happen. Dun, dun, dun. And then he was surprised when you kind of melted down. And you were thinking about Mary and Damien. About expectations. You also were thinking about that thing about religious leaders passing on their knowledge to their children and how important that is. And yes, there are those who can't have children. And some of those pass on knowledge in different ways. Those who don't choose not to have children. I never regretted having children. But I'll tell you this. I can walk away from them. Not two small ones, But the whole idea of what that could turn into would be easy to walk away from. I kind of saw what would happen in time about, well, evolution, and it makes sense. And sometimes it's destructive, but there's always some destruction and change. We talked about those belief structures. That's force of nature or destruction of belief. And you know what the future needs sometimes? Change. Well, either they didn't know what the past was in such a way that, well, I could go into a long discussion about that. About things that take, and I'm going to use the Bible. I've only read it once, and I don't remember a lot of it. Like some people know all the I call them chapters because it's a book written by different people, perspectives. Interesting though, right? Do you sound? I wrote this. I said, what would happen if there was a psychology of Stephen? And I know that sounds weird, but you can see how destroying oneself on an inward level could bring change. Not just you, Stephen, because I don't think you need it anymore. You're like, you know? And that thing about monkey see, monkey do, you know? That happens sometimes with parents and children. Children copycat what their parents do. Except it's really different. It usually doesn't happen until after they're independent. You know why? They're copying their friends or their classmates and struggling against their parents. It's a natural developmental process. And if anybody has watched children in school, you know that, they're not acting like their parents. They're having fun with their classmates. And then when their parents say, why are you behaving like that? Well, parents don't realize that that's how everybody at school behaves. Or that's how they play outside together. So, interesting. And I thought about that too. Like, when you look at development into older age, children tend to go through those phases of independence, and then they kind of school or whatever, and then they kind of turn into their parents for a little while. They challenge their parents again, and then they move away, and then they go back to their parents, and they go, how did I turn up so much like you? And you're like, because they listen. And that stuff gets stored in memory. Interesting. But I bet you parents don't think about that. Well, how can you think about that 24/7 when you have children running around? If you did, that wouldn't be living. It'd be like, and that's true. A lot of parents live their lives for their children. Do you know what I mean? They live their lives for their children, so they don't have a life. I'm going to make this comparison, and don't let it be a strange comparison. But remember how I said I held Savea all the time and did work on the computer for school and work? And a Bjorn in my lap? Or a swan song? It's just a comparison. I could have a parakeet or something. They wouldn't like the parakeet. It's interesting though. And remember I said I wouldn't change a thing in my life if I had to relive it? Yeah, probably. It's just really weird. I mean, I do like those stories too of animals adopting other animals that aren't their own kind. Because it shows that there's compassion even there, or maybe there's a recognition. Yeah, I was thinking that too. I know some of you are like, what are you thinking? Because I've looked back and looked at the videos where I said, oh yeah, I was thinking this exact same thing. And I'm like, I know exactly what I was thinking. Well, there is something to be said about winter. Well, and most people know if they live in a cold climate, you almost feel like you're going to hibernate. You know? Because it gets darker. Unless you're a night owl. But there's something about body rhythms and spirit. I used to get up. It wouldn't matter like what time I went to bed. I would get up at the same time. And those internal clocks. Fascinating. I bet you people get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and are like, I always get up at 4 even on my days off. And I can't get back to sleep. Because you've accustomed your body to doing that. Well, and if you think about it with children, they set the clock for a lot of things. Like, feed me. Or I'm awake, I want you to pay attention to me. Things like that. I was thinking that, but I was thinking about that word and that symbol, anarchy. Well, and there's a lot to be said about some destruction of belief is anarchy on an individual level. And do you know all those zombie movies? If you look at that movie in some different context and say, The Walking Dead, the brainwashed into lies. So a lot of times you're like, have I been sleepwalking my whole life and listening to the lies that hold my spirit down? Have you ever wondered why people say, well, you're no good, you're not going to make anything out of your life? And some people fall victim to that. They fall into others' beliefs of them. You know? And if you tell somebody long enough, say like in treatment, that you're an alcoholic, you're no good, and they don't say you're no good, admit you're an alcoholic, admit it, 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 admit it. And what do they start thinking? I'm an alcoholic. I'm a drug addict. I'm a drug addict. Or other things. And that becomes a mindset. And when I talked about that word before, some people have a general idea about what an addict is. Some people have personal ideas about what an addict is. But sometimes people fall into this umbrella, like, these are addict behaviors, and I'm going to live that. You know? And I'm not judging anybody for that. I just didn't do that. And they kept saying that you're exhibiting addict behavior. And I kept saying, no, I'm not. You know? And that's even away from drugs. Do you ever notice how people that really like AA or really like a program that go all the time think that other people can't make it without a program? Because they're judging you. Oh, like, there's no way you can do it without this or this or this. Sometimes that's like church. Some people don't go to AA, but they'll go to church. Or they'll meet every Saturday at, say, a meditation center or at a coffee shop and talk to people about other things besides addiction. And they find other ways to cope with it. Some people throw themselves into school, too. Some people change addictions. And part of it is because there's a mentality with addictions that there was something wrong with you. And now what if they take away that one thing that's wrong with you? Now what's going to be wrong with you? Well, you might find something else. And I'm not saying that, oh, well, then I shouldn't quit drinking, or no, you know. But a lot of, I'm going to say, this is going to sound like cold-hearted, but a lot of drinking started because people wouldn't talk about their feelings. And you notice, and then it kind of got right into the population. culturally acceptable. But at least a lot of people were talking about their feelings. That got read in there too. You don't have to believe that. But sometimes alcohol and drugs are a product of the environment as well. I mean, it's like, and I didn't really ever care if anybody, like now, people are like, oh, is it going to bother you if I drink? And it's like, no. My family always did that too. They were like, well, I'm going to drink. And it's like, okay. You know, go ahead. Weird though, right? It's like, hey, if you have anorexia, do people come up to you and say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm going to eat in front of you? Or you've got a purse addiction and somebody's like, hey, what about my new purse? I mean, oh, sorry, I bought this new purse, or this, they've got an addiction to cars, and you're like, oh, I just leased a car, it's so, sorry, it's like, I mean, it's just weird ways to think of things. Not that you have to think about them that way. I mean, I was thinking about that too. That crock pot. Never having used one, I thought I had to put water in it. And then I looked for instructions. You know what I was going to do? Well, I tried to call Sean. Because it's not mine, and for one, I didn't want to wreck it. I don't know, it's weird. I like that that dusk and dawn thing. Well, you can think of it as sunset and sunrise. And then there's other meanings in that. It's weird because, well, who knows what I'm thinking about in my mind, right? Well, and it was... Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna ask Lynn what she thinks about... Well, and in many ways, I can see Lynn wanting destruction of... wanting truth. In ways I can see Eric wanting the same thing, and then at different times I can be like, maybe he wouldn't. You notice how I said my sister was like, I don't want to know the truth, because then I feel like I want to have done something, and it's like, you couldn't take care of yourself because you were a child. You see how children feel responsible sometimes? Well, I've seen that card before in any deck. It's funny because I pulled that card a lot. When if you think about that in like what it's been portrayed in movies, there's been so many clues in movies and books over the forever about magic leaking into the world and saying, please hear us, please see us, please somebody understand. And most people just do this throughout their lives. And I walk around like that sometimes too. Like, but I'm thinking or looking, and I know, what's funny is sometimes I see a person's face, and then I notice something else about them. But I recognize their face. And it's funny if you think about this. When somebody walks by you and they get past you, like right here, do you think about them again? Or do you think, sometimes you do that. What if you just were like really interested in somebody and you saw somebody and you're like, hey. There was a movie, I can't remember what it was, what somebody goes, I don't know if maybe it wasn't even a movie. I don't know if I'll ever get a chance to tell you. What if you said that to somebody on the street? I think you came into my life for a reason. And not to be crazy, but just like, I recognize you, or, hey. I don't know. Sometimes people might strike up a conversation with you. I know, and then they're like, well, Stephen, you're out of this world sometimes. You're like, or in your own world. But that didn't mean that I wouldn't have talked to people. And in many ways, I'm not going to make an excuse, and I'm not going to say, well, I was better than people, because I didn't think that. But in many ways, we learn how to communicate on a superficial level to say, I'm busy, I don't have time for you. Or like, how's the weather? Or no, not only that, but what if you said, those leaves are like orange and yellow and against the green grass and the tree bark? Have you ever seen anything like that? Oh, it only happens a couple times, once a year. Do you remember last year when it happened? I do. I don't know. It's weird though, and maybe people like superficial talk. I used to sit around and talk with my friends about who knows what we thought. Remember when you were younger, you could just sit down and could talk about like weird stuff. Not that you're not talking about weird stuff now, but you just have a different perspective. don't know. I heard that ringing in my ears today twice. You know, I mean, it was like, and remember I said it's not bilateral? Bilateral, both ears? It's only in this one. And it's not external. It's not an external noise. And I don't want to say this to try this, but you know, when I talked about like falling into somebody, a lot of times that's a close synchronization of souls. I told Sean once, I don't want to get lost in you, or I don't want to fall into you. He said something similar. But there's something about taking someone else into your being, especially when you're in a relationship, and that doesn't necessarily end when the relationship ends. And there's some religious things that would like to see that end. But I don't think in the beginning that wasn't supposed to end. Original teachings were probably like those connections are the things that hold souls and spirit together. What if you let go of all those connections? Where would you go? Remember I held up that chain link? And sometimes, or a fence, sometimes if there's a hole in a chain link fence, what happens? If the holes are, it's so small, sometimes you have to try to figure out how to patch it back or sew it back up. What if a lot of links or chains got cut out of, say, a soul net? Well, and what if one soul was the soul of the planet? And if that let go, what would happen? It's funny because I look at this reflection. Now I'm looking at, so I see several of them. Because I see my face, so there's one. I see you there, and I see you over there. And it's not that building over there. There's a reflection of me in the window looking back at me. So there are two faces of Stephen looking back at him, and then I'm looking at two that way. But there's more than that. Because sometimes you can look in your glasses and see yourself reflected many times. And remember how I said sometimes teachers are the best students, and sometimes students are the best teachers. Do you see how that works on an individual level too? I know you do, Stephen. I know you do. Weird, huh? What if I said that was the Father, the Son, and the Ghost, and the machine? And maybe that's the Father's pain. This is the Son, and this is the Ghost. And I'm not saying that that's like the window panes. I mean, I think a lot of people think I'm thinking about the building over there. But try it once. Set up a video thing with lots of reflections around and say, who am I talking to? Well, you think you are talking to you. Well, and you're talking to an audience too in some ways. But when you look up and you see yourself talking, and you're like, I look a little different in that reflection. And then you're like, I look different in this lighting. And you can see yourself and it's funny too, Stephen, because you don't care if your hair's messy or what you have on, or, you know, you eat like you're having a conversation with somebody. Why not? It would be like having a conversation with another human robot, a living machine with a soul. So do you bring your soul when you go out to eat with other people? Or do you just go, oh, I'm going to meet friends, and it's a work thing, But Stephen, you know, because you've spent time by yourself so much, some of the hardest things that you've ever done really were to face yourself. And you would destroy it to see something else come. And you don't mean the physical body either. Well, and you had said that you will never allow your being to be in a woman's body. Well, and she was mad about that. And that sounds weird to talk like, well, she's mad. But she said, no, that is right. And in many ways, maybe you weren't supposed to be a boy child, but you were. Or maybe you were. I don't know. It's weird, and then you're like, well, you're just egocentric. You think you're special. I do think I'm special. I let people tell me a lot that I wasn't. And not that I'm not the same. I just don't conform to a lot of the same thinking that many other people do. That's why it's been hard for me to talk to my own family sometimes, because I'm like, you don't get me. You don't understand where I'm coming from. And people are like, why did you give so many things away? Like, or being generous. It's because I didn't really ever care that much about money. Yes, I cared about working really hard at times and taking trips. I didn't care how much money I was spending or on other people either. I know, and this all seems like none of it matters in a way. But Stephen, you like saying it, so it matters. Yeah. In some ways, well, I'm not going to say that because that's a trap itself. I don't care that much about that myself. I was going to say, some ways personal diaries of videos are nice, but some of them are forever. And people might do things when they're younger that they wouldn't do when they're older. Or somebody might invade your privacy. So you have to be of the mind that you don't care. But remember, the future is the present or the now. So you might not care right now. Well, you already know what can happen then, or ahead of time.
This is not just happening in the realms of the reality that we experience. It's coming from somewhere much deeper.
So you said that you would destroy yourself now so that you would be destroyed in the future. But not now. You could deconstruct yourself now. And while you're talking, you know what I mean. And you're smart. So when you're building these temples on the inside and connecting with people on the outside and reaching out for people, you know, it's smart to destroy yourself and go inside your thinking and go, where is this at? Where has this been? And that'll come out. And I think that's a good idea. Part of that book, Stephen, you know what that... Yes. But do you think you're the student or the teacher? That's a good question. Well, you can see yourself in that reflection right there and right there. And sometimes, I mean, even without the camera, and you admit you just did it, you saw yourself from a different angle. And you were like, again, you went, oh. But you see how religion starts. And you see how you can tear it down. But you always knew that. Even when you were young, 17, 18, 19, you spoke of it. And you spoke to other people about it. And when you were younger than that, you kept asking, well, how do you know what Jesus said? Did he write it? But you know something now about that too, don't you? It's interesting though. And I'll say this, when religion meets the needs of culture, does that mean that it's changing the spirituality behind it? Or is it just changing the face of the church? Or does the church speak to the spirit? It's interesting. Or does the... That's even more interesting. And I mean church, you could use temple, meditation center, you know, a Wiccan circle, an individual practitioner of their own beliefs. You could just use all of those things. But if you have your own belief, do you destroy your own belief in order for there to be something new? You know what that involves? Taking down walls. And not the judge. Not the judge. But you know what that means? Is that walls come down. And not just on a heart level. Because, well, first maybe on a heart level, but then we externalize those walls and they go, now if the heart is there and you take down the walls there, or that you take down the walls of the spirit, then that gets externalized in time to take down walls of man-made things. And that's where beauty comes from. And destruction. Remember I talked about in that one video about the crane and the wolf? Think about that somehow, some different ways. I woke up from my nap and the cats were like, whoa. And then I was like, I just laid down and I felt like, oh, I feel kind of like I felt out here and the cats were like, And I thought, oh, that's weird. I kind of feel like... It's hard to destroy yourself. And I know people judge, they do. They're like, you smoke. And it's like, I breathe air. And in many, many ways, Stephen, you've said people kill themselves going out of their building because that's living. I mean, in dangerous areas, people take a risk every day with their physical body. In war, think about what happens, like, in Palestine or in Nazi Germany. People walked outside with their physical bodies and took risks. I don't know. You don't have to look at it that way if you don't want to, but it's interesting. It really is. I know people that were like, oh, I'm so afraid to go outside because something's going to happen. Well, guess where their bodies die then? And guess where their souls are? And there's some reasons people have got these extreme fears about going outside. Some people do have, and it might be their spirit or their soul. And on some level, that can be treated in a different way. I'm not going to get on this medication kick about people have been overprescribed medication. You know why? For one, they don't want to deal with their own shit. And then guess what happens? Oh, guess what medicine I'm on? And Stephen, you said this. You said this and you wrote about it. It's perfect. You know what drug companies do? Oh, if you're feeling sad, you know when people hear that? When their parents die. Or when they're, when something bad happens and they go, I've been feeling sad for a couple of weeks. I wonder if I'm depressed. And then they ask their friends, and they go, oh, I've been on such and such forever. I feel great. And I'm not saying sometimes there is a chemical imbalance. Sometimes that's on a spiritual level too. Right? You're like just pissing off about, 50 different organizations right now. Do you know what long-term medications, well, you know what they do. And so do scientists. But you know who they're working for? Absolutely. And you know who has a foothold in government? Absolutely. I was thinking that too. And it's like drug dealing. And I'm not saying that there aren't times where those things are needed. There are. When we've gotten so accustomed, a lot of places were so accustomed to like telling, oh, don't talk about your feelings. But you knew, Stephen, talking about your feelings. Well, and then you talked about them so much at one time, a long time ago when you were like in your 20s, that you were like, uh-oh. And even when you were drinking, some of your feelings, people were like, oh. I don't know. And you know what? Well, I'm going to say this too. I told you that already about ADHD, about kids not having time to run around outside. And a lot of times the parents are like, why are my kids so misbehaved? And then they call the school. What's going on at school? It's like, and then the school goes, well, we have 25 students. And your child's acting out. And the parent goes, well, my kid, what do you mean? Well, you've got to do something about it. I can't deal with this at home. And the school's like, well, have you had them evaluated for attention deficit disorder? I would be on their line going, hello? There's 25 kids there. Get them outside. You know why? Because children feed off of other children and their energy in a way that they're like, ooh, look at them. You know? And then, of course, you know what happens with ADHD. Yeah. And I'm not saying that there aren't kids that can't concentrate. Well, maybe they, as adults, you know why? They never learned how to do it as children. Do you want to know something else? We gave drugs to people that doctors and nurses and pharmacists were like, I don't think this is going to do anything for them. And remember what I told you about salt being in everything that you eat? So why put more on it? Guess who wants you to use salt?
The true self is something I believe you experience as there's an inner calmness, an inner solidity, an inner validation, an inner peace, an inner freedom.
It's interesting though.
The smell of that, the sense of that. If you learn how to live there, you wouldn't want to live anywhere else.
When that guy just brought up a really good point too in that song. And see what songs do sometimes? They're like, could you live in the soul sense? Is that kind of beyond the reality of everyone else? So you're walking around in this newly constructed temple of yourself, and everyone else is just maybe. And a lot of times, does that mean that you have to conform? No. But people do. And that's what's a little bit scary, too. And that's about secrets. What if everybody was at that level? What would be next? Because that's what people would say. What's next? And sometimes those levels are, that's what you got. You know? Or that's what you got in this incarnation of your soul journey. And that's why people were like, why aren't you mad about your mom? Why aren't you mad about your whole entire life? And it's because you knew at an early age, that's what you got, Stephen. You know? And that is damning too. You're like, oh shit, those are the cards I got dealt. But you always change it. And you did say, if I'm going to be an addict, when you were living in Golden Valley, I'm going to be a full-time addict. And you were. And you said, I know when I'm going to stop. Well, when the money ran out. See? And that's not an excuse. I don't even want to tell you exactly what I did. But I knew, I was like, this is self-limiting. It's going to... And I said, yes, maybe one day. I wrote that. I said, will I ever drink again? Well, maybe not in this. You know, and I don't plan on it. But can you say with certainty of anything what you're going to do tomorrow? And that's what's hard. People want... They want black and white. And you want, there's gray and colored areas in there, and spirit and shadow. You said that too about your grandma. You said, what if my grandma died tomorrow? And that wasn't an excuse. But you said that. You were like, I could never promise. What if my grandma died tomorrow? And it would be like, well, exactly. it's weird to think that way. Like, and people want, here, sign, you'll never do this again. No. That would be like saying, I'm never going to walk down this street. Or, I'm never going to breathe oxygen. You know? That's kind of stupid. Well, a lot of times people do that, and then when they fail, they're like, you know, well, because you set yourself up to fail. I don't know. And what I would want, if people are watching this, is what I would want is to apply that to how you or how they have to deal with their own lives. Not in a sense that in a group, but like on an internal, getting it from here down to here, and maybe out here to talk about, because you did that, Stephen. You listened to other, and that's why you listened so much, because you were like, and then you thought about it, and you were like, processed it, and you're like, yeah, I feel it. And you used your own words. And somehow you had a sense that it was a lot older. I keep reading that thing. I have something that she warned them, the goddess, of your coming, and they were not impressed by your actions. And I was like, that's funny. Because who would the goddess be? And who wouldn't be impressed? Right? Sorry. But think about it. What are some of the really old circles, the oldest circles? And then you think, who really has the most to lose? And who has the most to gain? And then figure that out, who's upset. Sometimes you think about spirits being slaves to human bodies. Well, think about that now. What if spirits were worried about human bodies being able to tap into their energy and then connected to everyone, use that energy? I think some spirits would be, or some, well, imagine the power that could be generated from that for great goodness, and see how that is built on great destruction. And you know who's, well, and that would create a different kind of spirituality. So all the great houses would fall. And that's all of them. But what would be beautiful about that too is then a creation story could be made. One with everybody. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying that they weren't made by the same people in the past. Or maybe. See how tricky that is? And how that gets you here, and then later you'll think about it, and it's like, I know. And that's almost like this cycle again. Remember, now you're on a circle, and you're a hamster, and now you're tired, and you're gonna get off. It's interesting. Or it's a new perspective, or my perspective, and not just yours, Stephen. You know that too. Well, I'm not stupid. But they always knew that it was in you. You just hid like the hermit. And guess who wanted to break you out of that shell? And you volunteered. And in many ways, you know what they used to get you? Your children. And you knew that. You told them how to do it. But now you're like, because you said my children could be over there. They could be that reflection right there. They could be right there. They could be everyone in this building or no one in this building. Because you can see yourself as a mother, a father, and a child, and a brother and sister to just about anyone. You know, that day you were pointing out people on the street? Family, 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 family. Who does that? Not many people. You know, most people are like, different than me, different than me, different than me, different than me, different than me. You know? And then you know that, how that circle went. So everybody now, we'll say the entire world, that whole entire planet, creates a new creation myth together 10,000 years later. But you know that that's how it works. And key central figures but that's beautiful. And then you ask yourself, when does it end? When some say when the lights burn out. Right? And I'm not talking about stars or suns. Interesting. That guy's... Never mind. Anyways, that's funny though. And maybe some people don't look at it that way. And maybe some people do. Or maybe some people should stop and think, wow, I'm guilty of killing my brother, my sister, my mother, my brother, my beliefs. You know, creating our own beliefs, killing more people because of those beliefs, our brothers, sisters, mothers, babies, creating different beliefs, doing it again and again and again and again. And that's why I said I'm guilty of being human and Stephen Philip Lindquist. And I would stand trial and say that. At war crimes tribunals. And then I would point my finger not in blame, but in shared responsibility, saying, you and you and you and you and you are my brother, sister, mother, child, spirit, because I look at it like that. And people would go, I'm not related to you. And I would say, think again. And they would say, well, you don't have the same parents. Or I'm saying, think way, way, way back. But no one thinks about it like that. I'm talking before the dinosaurs. Interesting. I bet you they don't teach you that in school. And if they do, what happens is that if you're in a religious family, that goes, you forget that. And then new belief. Do you know what is why I've had a lot of problems in some relationships? I like to start new traditions or new beliefs in the family unit. And it's not that I don't believe in the old ways, because I do. Really. And I was right. Some temples won't fall. You know why? The souls and the spirits are locked in there. And either they won't let them fall because they're making them learn. And you know what that causes? More lessons. And you know what? Some one person can't do it for all of them. And Savea and Mia, I mean, your physical bodies are children, but you might as well be, on some levels, adults. And I know maybe you don't understand that as children. But I would leave you these messages. Get it how I said messages? That sometimes they're a mess? And it's like, what are you talking about? Well, if I only wrote it, you would never understand. Because you'd be like, your writing is so weird. And over time, writing, you're like, oh, are you being insulting? Or what did you mean? I wrote something about a soul-eating bitch. And I think you thought it was about your mother. It wasn't. But in many ways, it could. I'm not getting into that whole thing again. But it's difficult to take something that was written in the past and apply it to today without context. And maybe it was taken out of context, and maybe I'm destroying belief right now. And maybe that belief was they hated you, Stephen. And they wanted to make you suffer. You said that. They were punishing you. And not about the cosmic stuff. They thought that you meant what you wrote. And it was about something else. Well, this has been like an hour and 26 minutes and 22 seconds. Don't take that out of context. You've got to internalize it and figure out some way to understand that just because something is written doesn't mean that it applies personally to you. Not you, Stephen, to them. And you knew that about the Bible and those Buddhist texts because you said, that is not right. No enlightened being would ever say that. And you said they didn't. But they were walking among them. What better way to see how how spirit would turn out than to plant seeds and then go back in there and see the destruction of the self and then create something new. 2,000 years later. Well, the difference is that there wasn't a network of strong enough people. Or maybe there wasn't enough people in place in certain places, say where energy could be tapped into, and not physical plant energy, not physical like energy, but spiritual energy. You know you had those conversations with people. And you know exactly who I'm talking about. There's more than one. But it's true. If say that one person wanted to plant the seeds of love on a world that was filled with hate or filled with something different, and they wanted to see something new happen, and maybe because they were there before in a different life and they had started a different religion, and they were like, oh, that's not working. You see? And then they walked among you. Are them. And then they were like, oh, this is getting too much. Let's bring enlightenment. But you know yourself, Stephen, that any psychology of one person, somebody else comes in. And you think that's beautiful. And you would help them destroy yourself. Just to watch something different. And that you're right, that you used to ask people, are you a hand of chaos? You meant drug stuff. But you also meant something else. You kind of meant letting go of inhibition and fear and losing control. And you're right, you had controlled a lot of parts of your life really well. You hid inside your own temple. And you know that. Interesting. Well, I challenge others to do that. Even if it's, and this is what's funny about it, it doesn't have to be a big belief, like in religion. It can be a small belief to start with. And then you can do like those stacking those dolls. Take a layer off. Take another layer. Another. And then you get to this itty bitty thing. And you think, well, that's not impressive. Well, what's at the heart of it? And all of a sudden you got this little thing with this great big heaven around. You know what I mean? It's just like, and that's kind of creation as well. I'm going to end this now.